I'll admit, I was really excited about this game when it was first announced because I thought the idea of Phoenix traveling to a foreign country was interesting. In the end, the game was kind of a mess. However, it still managed to be far better than the previous game. Before I begin, this review contains spoilers for the main series. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice was confirmed for localization shortly after its Japanese release. Unlike the previous 5 games in the main series, it mostly takes place in a foreign country known as the Kingdom of Khura'in, which introduces a new gameplay feature, the Divination Seance, which shows the victim's final memories, causing Phoenix to have to find contradictions between the memories and the evidence. Most of the other gameplay features are pretty much the same as Dual Destinies, meaning that the things I didn't like about the previous game are still present. Apollo's perceivability still cannot be used in court until the final case, and there are no penalties during psych locks. The Moon Matrix is also the same, but I can't really complain there since I don't really mind it too much. Besides, Spirit of Justice got me thinking about whether or not it would be appropriate to use it, and in the end, I have to say it works pretty well in Spirit of Justice, but I mostly kinda don't care. The Thought Root is also present, which got a pretty good visual upgrade, but most of the time it was really easy to figure out what options you were supposed to choose. Things I did like about Dual Destinies have returned, such as investigations being clear on what to do and where to go, as well as the backlog. Spirit of Justice also returned some features from older games in the series, such as the ability to examine wherever we want, rather than just being restricted to the crime scenes. There's also the return of forensic investigation, and holy Spirit of Justice really badly f***ed up. The forensic investigation parts of the game are not only really hard to control, but you have to examine all over really large items, which is a complete pain in the ass. Another returning feature is the consult feature from Dual Destinies, which can be disabled. One interesting thing to return is the original 5-strike penalty system from the first game, since Dual Destinies didn't really take advantage of having a health bar like the previous games did. Spirit of Justice also happens to do some things for the first time, for example being the first main series game to have music at the title screen. Not only that, but it's the first main series game to have an options menu where you can enable or disable the consult feature, skipping of unread text, and some volume controls. Lastly, there are cutscenes like there were in Dual Destinies, and they look a lot better than the ones from that game. Anyway, Spirit of Justice returned some good things, added some good new things, messed up on bringing some stuff back, and didn't fix certain features at all, like the perceivability and the psych locks. Anyways, the game begins with Phoenix arriving in the Kingdom of Khura'in to visit his former assistant Maya Fey, but he came a little early because he was worried about her. Not long after he arrives, his tour guide, I'll be your guide, gets arrested. I'll be your guide. I see what you did there, Capcom. When Phoenix goes to see his trial, he finds out that there are no defense attorneys in the country and that Albie was going to get convicted just because of what the victim saw in his final moments. Phoenix ends up taking over the defense bench and decides to prove Albie innocent in court, and soon finds out that as a consequence, if Albie is found guilty, he will be considered just as guilty, and it's been suggested that Albie be sentenced to death. This is where he meets Rafa Padma Khura'in, Crown Princess and Royal Priestess of Khura'in, who performs the divination seances. While Phoenix is taking on these cases in Khura'in, it's up to Apollo Justice and Athena Sykes to take care of the Wright Anything agency while he's away. Unfortunately, something happens to his daughter Trucy Wright's magic show, a murder, and she's the one accused of committing the crime. As he investigates, he meets with Emma Sky for the first time in a couple of years, and later someone else from his past, Nahyuta Sahdmadhi. The game doesn't go into too much detail about that until later. Anyways, Nahyuta is the one that prosecutes Trucy's case. He's an international prosecutor and respected monk from Khura'in that believes convicting criminals in court will provide salvation for their victims. Nahyuta would end up prosecuting Phoenix's second case in Khura'in, which would reveal more information about a rebel group that's against their country's court system of no defense attorneys. Nahyuta ends up bringing Emma with him because he found her to be very useful. The defendant in this case is... God damn it, Maya. You can't go one game you're in without getting accused of a crime, can you? This was the part of the game when the case is starting to get really long. In the middle of the case, Phoenix ends up discovering a part of Apollo's past, the fact that he and Nahyuta were both raised by Dirk Sahdmadhi, the leader of the rebel group, the Defiant Dragons. The next case, where you play as Athena, isn't really anything more than filler, but I still found it interesting. Honestly, I thought it was one of the better filler cases in the series, especially with how Black Quill was handled. Him coming to the defense bench and fighting Nahyuta. It was amazing. The fifth and final case in this game is extremely long, and this is where the game starts to get really interesting. Dirk just happens to show up at the Wright Anything agency and asks Apollo to come with him to receive an item from Khura'in Village, the Founder's Orb from the Kingdom of Khura'in. When there, they discover that the guy they were supposed to get the orb from had passed away, and it was assumed to be natural causes. In the end, they end up getting the orb, but something happens. Someone else claims the orb to be the crystal of Amy Faye, and that it belongs to them. To make things worse, he's Phoenix Wright's client. This is when Apollo goes up against Phoenix in court, so it's up to Apollo to win the case to help the revolution in the Kingdom of Khura'in. Even Edgeworth joins everyone in the trip to Khura'in for no reason. Says nearly everyone else, but I think differently. I actually don't mind Edgeworth being used for his authority, because, well, the series hasn't really done much of any of that before. Spirit of Justice was really enjoyable all the way through the main game. There was not a single case that I did not like. Some of the things I do like, people seem to have many different opinions on. For example, before I played, a lot of people were saying that it was really good until after Case 3, but in my honest opinion, Case 3 itself was a mess. It went on for way longer than it needed to, Phoenix hardly making any progress the first day just for the sake of making it longer. Even though it had that issue, I still enjoyed the case. The fourth case in the game is one of the least popular cases in the game, yet it is one of my favorites. I loved seeing Nahyuta go up against Blackwell, and the witnesses were all very interesting characters. In the fifth case, some people didn't like the civil trial, and for the most part, I don't really mind it. The build-up to Apollo going up against Phoenix was handled really well, but Phoenix's behavior in the United States courtroom is a bit similar to how it was in Dual Destinies. And by that I mean him acting like he's never handled a case before. One of the biggest complaints that people seem to have with this game, though, is how Apollo's backstory was handled. It is true that Apollo being raised in the Kingdom of Khura'in pretty much came out of nowhere, and I'd assume nobody was expecting anything like this to happen. Some people say it doesn't make sense or it doesn't really work. However, I'm okay with it. We didn't know much about Apollo in the first place. There are some continuity issues with it that I won't deny, but this isn't the only Ace Attorney game that has any kind of plot hole. In Spirit of Justice, we find out that Apollo's biological father, Jove Justice, who died in Dirk's private residence because he was murdered. In Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, a reporter tells Phoenix that Apollo's father died in an accident on stage. Honestly though, I don't really mind the idea of either the reporter lying to Phoenix or just not being 100% accurate with his information. In the end, I have no problem with Apollo growing up in Khura'in. At the end of the game, Apollo ends up dethroning the Queen of Khura'in, and when he finally takes her down, the courtroom does this really cool wind effect like the one seen in the anime. After all of that's done, Apollo ends up staying in Khura'in, which I don't really mind either. I really think it's just an excuse to return the divination seances in Ace Attorney 7. The cases I mentioned previously aren't the only ones. There are 3 DLC cases, only one of which is canon. 2 are just extra what-if scenarios that'll probably get a laugh or two out of you the first time you play through them. The canon DLC case is about an incident during a wedding reception involving time travel. Well, the defendant claims to be a time traveler. It's a good case on its own, but it has some flaws. Again, Phoenix is a bit like he was in Dual Destinies. You know, the whole immature, childish Phoenix Wright. It's the same with Miles Edgeworth. What pisses me off about Edgeworth is he starts off like he was in Dual Destinies, and then near the end of the game is like, oh, that's right, I had character development at one point. Spirit of Justice's positives definitely outweighed the negatives for me, but there were some other things I didn't really like. Despite taking the time to acknowledge the existence of Ace Attorney 4, it doesn't explain everything from that game. What the hell happened to the Jura system? How did Christoph Gavin's Black Cyclops work with the explanation Dual Destinies gave them, since it makes no sense in Christoph's case? How did Thalassa, who would later become Lammeror, end up in Borginia after Zack and Valent thought they killed her in an accident? Who took care of Apollo after Dirk dropped him off in America? Fortunately, one plot point I wanted to continue, the fact that Apollo and Trucy are half-siblings and Lammeror was their mother, is mentioned at the end of the game, even if Lammeror's name isn't said at that point. However, they just leave us hanging there, and we don't get to see how Trucy and Apollo react to the news. Even ignoring a lot of these plot points, Spirit of Justice requires a basic understanding of the trilogy, and you need to know about the events in Apollo Justice, making it one of the worst entry points in the series. Normally I would recommend playing in order, but I mean it with Spirit of Justice, because if you start with this game, you won't really understand what's going on. Spirit of Justice in the end was actually a pretty good game and miles better than the previous one that makes me want to die nearly every time I replay the middle of the game. I love the idea of Phoenix going to another country and how everything tied to khura'in. Not only is the game itself good, but the visuals and music were impressive. The soundtrack is one of my favorites, and the team went out of their way on the visuals. Spirit of Justice is one of the best Ace Attorney games. However, it won't be topping Trials and Tribulations or Investigations 2 anytime soon. That's all I have to say about Spirit of Justice. If you like the review, how about subscribing, liking the video, adding it to your favorites, and all the other stuff you can do? If you want to follow me on my social media accounts, links are in the description. If you want to watch more stuff I made, here are some videos you can click on. Just click on one of the end cards.